Folks, welcome back to the iHealth channel, iHealth Radio. This is the H Factor with your host, Hurricane H. New day, an awesome topic, a topic that there is not enough, even though we've covered quite a few of, shows in the past. There's not enough discussion. There's not enough, and we cannot really live without having this discussion. It's a serious discussion that always needs to be had, and I think it's important that we learn from different folks and different angles and different advocates that are out there. And today, my guest is a special guest because this is her world. She lives in this particular mental health advocacy, and specifically touching on suicide. So with me, I have Lisa Sugarman, and she is an author, national columnist, syndicated columnist. She writes, and she's a three-time survivor of suicide loss, and we're going to talk about that. She's also a counselor at the Trevor Project, and the storyteller, and a mental health advocate. So quite a bit there. She has great stories to share with us, and definitely she's going to enlighten us about things when it comes to suicide and how to potentially have the tough discussion and even potentially prevent some of these things from happening to our loved ones and friends, and even people who we don't know. And hopefully we can make a difference through the discussion that we can have today. Lisa, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here. I appreciate it.
Oh, it's a true pleasure. And like I said, I mean, you do a lot of stuff. I mean, and again, my little intro is not enough. It's never enough. So let's talk about Lisa, the work you do, but then also the story, why you got into what you're doing today.
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, you said all the things that I spend a lot of my time advocating for: mental health awareness and suicide prevention and suicide awareness, and just to change the dialogue on mental illness, to change the stigma around what it means to be mentally ill. And I wasn't always an advocate. I've been a content creator and a writer forever. I've written a bunch of parenting books. I was kind of in that space for a very long time, as a parenting author, talking on all the the big parenting platforms about how to raise perfectly imperfect kids. And then my life had a bit of an upending when I found out that my father, who I lost when I was 10, had actually taken his own life. So I had to re-grieve that all over again. I mean, when my father passed away, the story I was given was that he had had a heart attack, and I never questioned it. And then 35 years later, I found out very much by accident that he had taken his life, and it gutted me. It just tore me apart. It changed the narrative that I lived with for my whole life. It put the whole concept of mental unwellness just right in front of me, and I couldn't avoid it. I couldn't sidestep it in any way, and I had no choice but to kind of start from scratch and re-grieve his death, and then just try to understand. I just really tried to absorb everything I could about mental illness and about depression and about suicide and kind of that mindset. And it just kind of started me on this path. And, little by little, I started sharing my story in little ways, and then little ways became big ways. And then I started to feel that need to keep doing more, and got involved with Trevor Project as a crisis counselor. So now I'm on the crisis lifelines, and I'm talking to people who are in the same mindset that my father was in, with the idea of hopefully, helping them make a different choice. So that's kind of where I am, and that's what I do. And so now everything that I put out into the world is kind of focused on mental health and wellness, and how to learn to be vulnerable and ask for help, and how to change the narrative.
Well, that's a story that's very, I don't know how, I mean, I can't even find the words really to describe, because I mean,
it's heavy. It's heavy.
Yeah, I mean, you get a story that your dad passed. As most people, I mean, heart attack is very common, and but then only to find out years later that was not the case. I mean, that's pretty boggling. I mean, that might have literally a difficult impact on anyone that's watching or listening right now, especially you don't even know why. I mean, maybe you do know now, Maybe they sheltered you from the truth at the time, not to give you any trauma or anything. I guess that probably
Mm.
the logical thing that comes to mind. Maybe it was the right thing. Maybe it wasn't. And I'll defer to you to tell us more about how you feel about that. But
Yeah.
really, that is a big thing. And certainly living with that truth that was not true. And it was a lie technically. I mean, again, I don't want to
Yeah.
misstate, but really, like, I mean, some people say, well, we didn't tell you the truth, we just prevented you from knowing the truth. There's
Mm.
ways to turn around that discussion, but nevertheless, it is a difficult one, and it is a shocker. I'm not sure if you have kids. I mean, even just to tell your kids that, listen, your grandfather, this is, I mean, how you break that down to them. I mean, especially you do the parenting, and you
Mm.
have space. It is tough for just to get a handle on. And do you have siblings?
I don't have any siblings. I was an only child, and my dad was my person. He was that center, that hub of my whole life. And I mean, I'm incredibly close with my mom. We have a beautiful relationship. We talk every day. We are each other's best friend. We've always been close, but before I was close with my mother in that way, it was always my dad. I was a tomboy when I was a kid. So my dad liked to race cars and he liked to climb mountains and he was active, and um, I did everything with him. So, I was his buddy and he was my buddy. And so when he was gone, it was just devastating in every way. And there were just so many different moving parts to the whole story. I mean, maybe not at that time when I was 10, but you know, since finding out the truth about his suicide and kind of like backtracking over everything, that's what you do, or that's what I did. You just kind of replay everything from the beginning the way that you knew it, and then everything just changes. Everything just kind of splinters off in a million different directions, and so many things that you knew to be true weren't true. And it's so hard to get your mind around, and because there are so many moving parts to it. I mean, I've known this truth now for 10 years. And my daughters, I have two grown daughters. One is 23 and my oldest is 26. And we didn't tell them right away because they were teens, like teen age at that time. And so I needed just some time and space to just kind of process, and really just kind of somehow get my mind around this new narrative. And so it took me a few years, and I was very much like one person in the privacy of my own home, and then someone entirely different when I was out in the world, because I had this thing that I was just trying to understand and trying to grapple with that I couldn't bring out into the rest of my life yet. I didn't know what to make of it. So I spent years like that, and then ultimately told our girls, because I felt like it was so important for them as they move through their life, just to know, like, we all have that DNA cocktail, right? That we live with. Some things are hardwired from that DNA piece. Some things are environmental, situational. Like, we've got all these different parts of us, and that mental health piece, that's hereditary. A lot of that can trickle down, and I wanted my girls to know, like, this is what's in your history, and these are things you might see or you might feel, and when you do, we need to talk about it. So it's definitely been a process, and it's one that I know I'm going to go through for the rest of my life, because it ebbs and flows, and it changes as it goes.
Thank you. Now, I love what you said about this is something that will stay. I mean, there is a component that is in DNA, and
Mm,
not a lot of people know about that. Not a lot of people even would think that that's related or that could happen. I mean, this is
mm,
actually the first time I'm hearing it in from an advocate. That there is a risk, of even that being as a characteristic in your DNA. And we think about diabetes, we think about other things, but you never hear about, like, hey, you can be suicidal, and that can be also
mhm,
in your DNA. I mean, that's a whole different world right there that opens up, because if someone's watching and listening right now, like, oh my god, you know
mhm,
do I have any history in my family? Because maybe you don't even know. I mean, look, if nobody told you, eventually you would have known, and that could have been all along. So it is pretty risky business not to know.
mm.
And I
Yeah.
think what you do now, the work you do, is so valuable, because you are bringing this to the surface to people, and you are bringing, 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 to people, and and awareness. I mean, as you said, they just need to know. People need to know,
Mhm.
so they can at least be aware. And if you're aware, you can prevent. So you're ahead of the game. If
Yeah.
you're not, it could be too late. So before we go any further, I'm not sure if you're able to share a little bit of what you discovered and what were some of the reasons potentially that got him to do so. And are you in your work? Do you kind of guide people to maybe prevent or avoid some of the things or the stresses that potentially, you know, got him to get to that final decision?
Yeah, first of all, I mean, and just this is just a disclaimer for you. There's nothing that I won't talk about where this is concerned. So ask me anything because I'm super open about it. I mean, part of so much of what I do is encourage people to share all the parts, even the uncomfortable, difficult parts. So that's out
Thank
there
you.
just
I
so you know.
appreciate it.
Um, it's hard to say because you got to keep in mind that my dad passed away in 1978. And you think about that time period, right? That time period was such a funky time in our collective history. I mean, people were not talking about mental illness, people were not talking about seeing therapists, people were not talking about being medicated, people weren't talking about their unwellness. So he was living in a time where there were certain societal expectations where you just kind of soldiered on and you kind of sucked it up. And my father was an incredibly sensitive and kind and beautiful man. He was never like the kind of guy that you would say would be like posturing, like try and be a tough guy. He wasn't like that at all. But we didn't know that he was suffering. So we really don't know the full why. And that's something I struggle with. That's something I live with. I went back into therapy about a year and a half ago for myself. And it was one of the most beautiful things I've ever gifted myself was going back in to therapy. And one of the things that I really have a tough time with is just fully understanding the why. I mean, my dad did leave a note. It was very, very brief. It was more just I'm sorry and I can't go on and I love you. And there were no details. It was simply that. So, we know that he was under a lot of stress. He had a full-time job. He was a busy guy. We live just north of Boston. So my dad would commute into the city every day. He had this big full-time job. And then he also took over my grandparents' real estate business. So he had two full-time jobs. And he came from a family. Look, my dad's nickname growing up was the unwanted. So, I mean, you don't even need to really go beyond that
Yeah.
one fact to understand that my dad came from a really challenging family. They were not a loving family, not a supportive family, not even very kind, unfortunately. It's hard for me to say it because it's hard to acknowledge that, but it's the truth. And it had a huge impact on my dad. So we know that a lot of the stress that he felt came from there. Beyond that, we don't know. So as far as the work that I do now, I mean, that's why I became a crisis counselor because, I can advocate all day long. I can write books or I can have conversations like this with you and write newspaper columns all day long. But there's something very different about being on the phone, being at that grassroots level, taking the call from the person who is at imminent risk. Like they have started the process and they're struggling and they don't know how to stop it and they don't know what their other options are. I I knew that even if I had the opportunity to change someone's mindset, one person, just one person, that would be it for me. Like that would be the end game for me is to know that I could help one person. And then you do that. And then you just want to keep helping someone. You just want to keep that momentum going and keep that dialogue open and keep answering the phone calls. And that's what I've been doing. And we don't try and stop someone in the sense that it's not my job. I'm not a clinician. I'm not a trained therapist. I'm a crisis counselor who's trained to hold space and trained to de-escalate someone and help someone come up with a safety plan or find someone resources. And a lot of the time I just spend listening to people on the phone. And every time I answer the phone, I think about my dad. And every time I get off a call and it's a successful call where someone, feels more grounded or feels centered or they're no longer suicidal, that's it for me. That's the end game for me.
Wow. Well, we're gonna go deeper there because I need to
Yeah.
learn more about the work you do. But so you talked about maybe not understanding exactly what happened, but definitely you do have the
Mm,
proof that it happened. But you
mm,
talked about a couple of things that can probably be triggers to many people watching and listening right now. They might not even know about it, or they because that's the thing. Like you don't never know. I mean, I'm talking to you. I don't know how I can behave any given moment because life
mm.
happens, right? And
Yeah.
that's a challenge, Nick, because we all have moments of weakness. We all get through, life, and life can throw quite a few heavy punches at us all the time.
Mm,
And I don't think there's anyone who can deny that or say that, oh, my life is peachy. I'm good. Listen, I'm a very positive person, and believe me, there are times where life can put a ton on you, and you feel that weight, and it's just how you deal with it. Sometimes it's
mm,
whether some people are religious, some people are spiritual, some people they're just like determined. Nothing phases me. But at the end of the day, there's still a threshold. There's a limit to any one of us, out there. No matter who and what you think and how strong you think you are, you'll get through a moment where you're gonna get a weakness, more point. And that's where it becomes very dicey. But
mm,
in the keywords you said is that he was working full time. He had another
mhm.
job. And by the way, that's the case of a lot of people today. More than
Yeah.
ever, people are doing double jobs, triple jobs, and it's been going for decades. And now with everything that's going on, the last at least 4 years since the pandemic and on, it's gotten worse. People are just coming out of stress, and it's starting at a younger age now. It's not even, an older age. It's
Yeah.
from teenage to on, and I kind of mentioned this previous to the show. I've lost a couple of cousins myself, in when I was younger, and
Mhm.
like last year ago, year and a half ago, my son's friend took his own life. So and
I'm so
this
sorry.
this is a 15-year-old kid, so it's not even like this is someone that is had all the life ahead of them. And I use this example not so much. I mean, I obviously I feel bad for his parent, his parents and what happened, but the idea is that hopefully some other parents and families watching and listening, they can at least try to be closer, see and know what could be some of the triggers. And sometimes you don't even know the triggers because that's the thing.
Mhm.
People are not gonna talk, even today, you mentioned like in the 70s, it was taboo to even think about mental health, right? It is still
Mhm.
the case now. The
Oh
difference
yeah.
is there's more of an open mind to podcasts and to shows. And I mean, we
Hmm.
do have like I do have a monthly show with a world-renowned psychiatrist, and we cover questions from people that actually ask questions about mental health and how things they can handle certain situations. But this is a serious matter that is affecting everybody around the world. It's not
Hmm.
doesn't there's no gender to this. There's no race to this or
Yep.
ethnicity or nationality or everybody is definitely potentially in a point or another can get into this stuff. And
Mm.
even from a religious aspect, if you talk to someone religious, they're going to tell you, well, there's evil, and evil can drive bad negative energy. If those that are spiritual, they can tell you negative energy. We
Hmm.
know it exists, and we have to be a little bit mindful about it and understand that no matter what, there is a light, at the end of the tunnel. There's better
Yeah.
life.
Yeah.
We have to keep people hope, and I think hope is a great thing to have to hang on to. Hopefully, we get through this life without making a decision that is irreversible. I mean, that's
Right.
the ultimate, not now that I said that, those are things that you talked about, but this is
Hmm.
stuff that you talk to people every day. Now I mean, again, thank you for clarifying. You're a crisis counselor. I didn't
Hmm.
think I mentioned that in the beginning, but I didn't quite fully understood what it took to be one. But really, so you actually is that the 988? Like it's linked to the 98 exchange or
Yeah. Well, this is the Trevor Project. So the Trevor Project is the country's largest LGBTQ resource. It's a crisis support resource hotline for at-risk LGBTQ youth ages 13 to 24. I mean, that's our primary demographic. We'll answer calls from anyone. We do get calls from people who are out of the demographic in terms of age, or maybe they're calling from out of the country because it's so easy nowadays to call from anywhere in the world. So we do get calls from all over, but our primary demographic are those youth up to 24 years old. And the Trevor Project is its own 800 number, but we also do get 988 calls that are filtered in for sure. Yeah, we get like an overflow of those as well. So there's definitely a double dip there.
Well, thank you. I mean, again, I just I always try to give the access to that number to
Mm.
people, and hopefully people know that it exists.
Mhm.
I mean, we need to know. It's like 911. That's like your next one. I mean, that's before 911. Hopefully,
Yeah, yeah.
because 911 will be too late, right? We want 988. At least someone needs that. But obviously, depending in this case, you have a particular demographic that you dedicate to help and assist to prevent. Now, is there anything particular that you find from the demographic versus the other groups, or the other, I guess, calls? Is there, or are they all the same? I mean, in
Oh
nature,
no.
yeah.
Mm-mm. No, they're all different. I mean, there are definitely buckets of issues that we see more often than others. Like it's an LGBTQ focused service. So you've got a lot of people out there who are struggling with gender or with sexuality, or there's coming out and they're afraid their family is going to alienate them. God, we have everything from abuse to obviously suicidal behavior, homicidal behavior, homelessness, job insecurity. We have a lot of people who we call familiar voices, who are people, they're just calling every day because they don't have anyone in their life. They don't have a support system. They don't have a family necessarily, or that friend community that they can draw on. So they call us to be able to have someone to check in on. And so we hear everything from all walks of life, all types of issues, and they aren't all just people calling at higher imminent risk or harming themselves. It's people who are just lonely or isolated or frustrated, and that's okay because we're there to listen to them, just like anybody else.
Again, I'm assuming that that's the first step. If they can't talk to anyone, then
Mm,
those ideologies, or are gonna get in, and they sink in.
mm,
So the idea is that as long as they can talk to someone, you can diffuse any of those thoughts and hopefully
mhm.
eliminate them, and basically disengage that thought process that it's unbelievable. I mean, it hearing it. I mean, I'm sure your work is just like, at the end of the day, you go home very, it's I don't know. You gotta need some sort of a what do you call it, stress relief
Stress it,
process.
yeah, yeah. I mean that's one of the things that is super important, that anybody who's in that mental health profession, whether you're a doctor, whether you're a nurse, whether you're any kind of a caregiver or a crisis counselor or a therapist, like you are taking it all in, and you're doing all the space holding, and you're doing all the helping and the emotional support, and it does definitely take a toll. So there's a big stress within our organization, is a big stress to make sure that or encouragement, I should say, for all of us to have our own self-care practice, and for all of us to be able to kind of detach. And because we don't have call centers anymore. The pandemic kind of did away with call centers, where all the counselors were together in kind of like a bullpen environment, and people were talking and sharing, strategies and things like that while they were taking calls. It's not like that anymore. So everyone's doing all of this work at home. So
Alone,
there's no
yeah.
there's no separation. So it's really especially important that we have the ability to kind of get up and move away from the space where we spend all this time, and have these self-care practices. I mean, like for me, I journal every day. I get up early. I meditate every single morning. I practice yoga. I run. I go to the gym. I have my own outlets, and it is so important because it can get really heavy, and you've got to have a way to purge that.
Well, thank you, and actually, that's a great differentiator, because you're right. It is different if you're in a call center with a bunch of people doing the same work, and you can
Mhm.
go to the break room and have a discussion and get it out of your system. Here, you're not gonna dial the next
Hmm.
person. It's all on the queue, and everybody is separate, and you don't see anyone other than your immediate family.
Hmm.
Which to your point, I mean, you just getting all this bombardment of these things, and while you're trying to diffuse, you're still absorbing some of that energy, and that
Yeah.
can be a heavy duty weight on yourself as well. But I love what you said, that you have your own system to
Hmm.
deal with it, and yes, we do need to have those. Whether it's your watching movie, running, punching a bag, going to the gym, do something. Of course, nothing addictive or bad. We do
Right,
not
right.
recommend any of, like, some people can go, get, nice little, bottle of booze, and then they that waste
Yeah.
away. We don't want that. We want something constructive and positive, of course. But so I have a question,
Hmm.
I don't know if it's a technical or not, but do you find that there is, I don't know if you look at statistics, is there
Hmm.
any difference in terms of rates of potential suicide from LGBTQ?
TQ. Um,
Yeah.
the rates in terms of teens, of
Suicide rate.
non-LGBTQ teens. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what? Honestly, I wouldn't want to speak to those statistics because I'm not sure enough of them to know. What I do know, two things that I can share. The first thing is, and this doesn't really relate specifically to the LGBTQ community. It's more just like kind of within the dynamic of, just the human population, or especially in this country, the most at-risk population, people we tend to hear from the most, who are the most suicidal, are like 50-something-year-old men. That's one of the highest populations of at-risk callers that we have. So it's I don't know if that's
I'm in
surprising
that
or not.
category.
Yeah. I don't know
That's
if
my
that's
age group.
surprising. Yeah, it's a tough demographic. It's really, really hard. And for obvious reasons, you can imagine, especially in this world that we're living in right now, it's, people are struggling with a lot of job insecurity and food insecurity, and home insecurity, and unfortunately, there are a lot of guys out there who have the weight of the world on them, and they can't handle it as well, unfortunately. So we do a lot of call taking for that population. But there's kind of a flip side statistic to that, in terms of, and this is an LGBTQ related statistic specific from Trevor Project. Did you know that if someone is calling, if a youth in crisis is calling our lifeline, and one of us answers the phone and talks to that youth, that one person, one of us, is going to reduce the risk of that teen taking their life by 40%. Just one person. And it doesn't necessarily have to be one of us here on the crisis line. It could be you taking the call from one of your kids' friends, or they stop by the house and they're in a bad state of mind, and you're talking to them. One person to connect with can change that person's trajectory by 40%.
Well, I mean, one call is 40%. You get a couple, I mean, you're
Hmm.
done. I mean,
Yeah.
you're 100% almost there. I mean, three calls, you're ahead of the game. But
Hmm.
but but that shows how important talking is to
Hmm.
someone. I think that's the whole thing. I mean, it's like, if you keep everything inside, it's like a volcano, eventually going to erupt and boom. But
Yeah.
if you let, the flow out, and you can share with the people, I think that's, by the way, that statistic, I mean, thank you for breaking the differentiation between the statistics, but I
Mhm.
think that will apply even to non-LGBTQ, because I think
Yeah.
that's everybody that would probably have an ability to talk to someone. I mean, that's what
Hmm.
therapy and mental health and visit, getting some support system is important. Will make a difference in anybody's life. But you're right. I mean,
Hmm.
you talk about the age group of the 50, and I can relate to that.
Yeah.
Because here's the thing: you've worked about 30 years in your life, and
Hmm.
sometimes shit happens. Life can throw in a
Yeah.
very, very nice twist at that point, and now you're like, your health is not as it used to be in the early days.
Hmm.
You maybe, that's the other one. There's still, believe it or not, there is still an age limitation at work. Because
Yeah.
as you get up in age, people may not want to have you. Either you have too much
Hmm.
baggage, or you're just too old. For them, they might not tell you that, but there is some level of filtration there that happens. When they look at your resume, oh, you got 30 years of experience. I'll try to get someone who's going to get paid less, and and stuff. Believe me, those are real, folks. I mean,
Oh
whether you
yeah.
not, it's as real as it sounds. We can sugarcoat it with all the EOCs and all the stuff. That's great
Mm.
if you can get through, but you can document that. But there is a lot of that stuff that happens. So you're right. There are people at this point. They probably have kids in college,
Hmm.
got all the finances, the mortgages. As you said, we have inflation now. Every single thing can get to a point where you get to a point like I can't do this anymore. And again, I mean, it's going to sound as sad as this, but sometimes people would, you would think that I got to get out of here somehow. Now,
Yeah.
if you can't get out of here, any other way, maybe that's what you would think about at that point. Is like, you know what, I just don't want to be part of it, and that's actually not something we want to hear or we want to get to. And frankly, I love what you said about that. One call can reduce that,
Hmm.
thought to 40%. A couple of calls, a follow-up calls can almost, eliminate that. The more you talk about this stuff, the more you get it out of the system. I think you're talking about men. We have that macho concept. I mean, I
I
can
know.
I can relate to it. It's always very difficult to have a man cry or say this. I'm not saying that's general, but I think it's I guess the DNA. It's just part of you talk about DNA. It's just
Hmm.
that male testosterone kick in, that will drive some of that, and it's very difficult. You're not going to find a lot of folks, who will actually talk or want to talk or show vulnerability or like I am.
That's the key. That's the word right there is
Yeah, I mean,
vulnerability.
listen, I could talk to you. And it's very difficult. Listen, I can speak from my own. It is difficult to actually just go to someone and say, I'm having a bad time. I'm tired. You
Hmm.
just want to duke it out. You want to make it happen and you face it. And sometimes it gets very difficult. Listen, I've gone through it. I know how it feels. And it's difficult to actually go through sometimes, unless you have somebody that's side by side to help you and you talk to
Yeah.
someone and you support each other. And I think that's the problem. Sometimes you have no. When I asked you about do you have any siblings, because that's a little bit more, you share that responsibility, or at least the news together and you kind of help each other. But when you're solo, I am a lonely child too. So I can relate to
Oh,
not
really?
having, yeah, I have no brothers and sisters. So I can tell you it's very difficult. There's no one to
Mhm.
talk to,
Yeah.
and so a lot of times you talk to yourself. Now, luckily, I have a great wife that actually we're close and, everything. I talk to her, she talks to me. So that's my, like, if I'm not feeling right, I just talk to her and so on and so forth. So it helps.
Mhm.
But you're right. Some people don't have that ability.
Yeah.
They don't have someone, and so they just find themselves talking to themselves. And again, we got that whole, saboteur voice inside that says all the bad
Hmm.
things. Like you know what the hell, and that's not a good thing. So we want to encourage people to actually make a call. See someone, talk to
Hmm.
someone. Don't have, and that, by the way, from the shows that I've done and the discussions I've had, that's a very common theme, which usually people don't have anybody, they don't talk, and then they wind up making those decisions. Now you and I,
Right.
we had a brief discussion before when I used the word commit suicide, so let's talk
Yeah.
about that, because I know that that's a what we refer to, someone committed suicide.
Hmm.
Let's talk about what is a better way to rephrase that.
Well, so let's break it down. Let's talk
Yeah.
about
Mhm.
the terminology, the word choice in general. And look, you're not saying anything that hasn't been said for decades, right? I mean, that's what we're taught to say. That's how we've been taught to say it. But what's ended up happening is that, society evolves, we grow, we understand, we rethink things, we reprocess things, and we reevaluate things. And the mental health community as a whole has kind of reevaluated the word committed. And when you break that word down and you think about it, and you put it in a different context, right? You say the word committed, what do you think of? You think of maybe I committed a sin, maybe I committed a crime, or maybe I committed infidelity,
The
or
negative.
it's a negative connotation.
Yeah.
And so, and because of that, it automatically spins that act from one thing which may be completely innocuous and harmless. A person could have been just mentally ill and incapable of managing their own behaviors, and they made this terrible choice. But it wasn't because they were a bad person, it wasn't because they committed a crime, it was because they were mentally ill, right? You would never fault somebody for having a heart attack. We shouldn't fault somebody for being mentally ill either. But when you use the word committed, you're automatically attaching this negative connotation to it. And right now in this world, word choice matters. So we also, when we say that, it it somehow discredits the person too. It almost invalidates that person because it makes them seem like something they're not. And so when we change out that word and we swap it out, instead of saying committed, we say they died by suicide, or they ended their life, or they took their own life. Like, that's a very different connotation. It doesn't, there's no blame attached to that. There's no negativity attached to that. It's just, it's kind of,
Statement
it's
of
just,
fact.
it's true and a fact, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so now there is this movement within the mental health industry and community as a whole to just really get people to understand why we have to change that language. Because, if we're trying to change public perception on what it means to be mentally ill, and we're trying to destigmatize it all, and we're trying to move mental illness into the mainstream where it should be, right alongside everything else that we deal with, then we have to start by the way that we talk about it. And the way that we talk about it is negative when we use that word. So that's why we don't use it anymore.
Well, thank you. And I think that for anyone watching or listening, I mean, I think we ought to adopt a different way of stating it. And then you're right. When you use the word commit, it's, especially, in the context, committed robbery,
Mm-hmm.
committed crime, committed
Yep.
suicide, committed this, it does give you that negative, bad picture, and so it's the stigma to it. And as you said, I mean, there's no reason. First of all, if the person's already took their life, we shouldn't, take it any further than that. I mean, as you
Mm-hmm.
said, you stated the fact, but we want to prevent that from happening. So now, a question for you. By the
Mm-hmm.
way, I do love what you said about we don't blame people for having a heart problem or
Mm-mm.
any other disease or illness. Yet we look at someone with mental like they're responsible. Now,
Mm-hmm.
really, technically we all can be subjected to some level of mental health at any given point in our lives because we
Mm-hmm.
are, we have too many stresses around us and triggers every single day, from street, noise, to pollution, to food we
Mm-hmm.
eat, to the noise, to what we're subjected on TV, and
Mm-hmm.
everything. I mean, everything is around us: the work, the load, the family, the bills. Every single thing can be an actual added, pressure. And again, like everything else, if you put too much pressure, something blows, and we don't want
Right.
that. So now the question to you is: do you see in the work you do that maybe some folks with potentially a level of addiction have a higher potential, or I mean, do you even find out that there is a some sort of an addiction in the play, or it doesn't matter whether they are on some level of drugs or something? Because maybe that's another thing that could be like when someone gets into a stress point and they start having some use of some level, whether alcohol or drugs or
Mm-hmm.
even smoking stuff, it can get them to that point where they're not really 100 lucid. And so they might be, it makes it easier for them to decide, to take life, right? As opposed
Right.
to if you were a complete, in your state of mind that is solid, then you would know better. You can make the determination differently. I mean, is there something in there in your work, at least, that you see?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say that there's anything that I see directly. I mean, there are definitely people who will call in and they're in an altered state, and we know it and we can tell, and it definitely has a significant impact on what they're saying and how they're saying it, and maybe what they're threatening to do. Maybe it's it's just making it easier for them to kind of go down the rabbit hole that they're already going down. I mean, I think that unfortunately, and here's the thing about mental illness is a bitch. It's a sneaky little bitch. And it just is, it's so distorting, and it's so unkind, and it lies to us, and it doesn't make a difference. It doesn't make a difference who you are. Yes, of course, somebody who is, is maybe drunk, or maybe someone who's high, is going to be more susceptible to those, to those influences of their mental illness. But I mean, at the end of the day, it's the mental illness itself that takes over. And one thing I think that's really important, and I end up having this conversation, this part of the conversation, often with people in the context of, like, someone who decides that they need to take their life because there's something that they need to get away from. It's not it's never that they want to get away from their family. It's never that they want to get away from their friends or the people that they care about or their life. They're doing what they're doing because they just need the pain that they're in to stop. So that's what's corrupting them. And yeah, sure, things like, drugs and alcohol can certainly speed that along sometimes when they're already kind of on that path. But it's the illness itself that really is the thing that takes over in the end.
Well, thank you. That's a big, clarifier there because, as you said, if anything, we want to tell these people, we want to help people to see what
Mm-hmm.
they're going to leave behind, all the beautiful, folks that are around and things that they can look up, to, as opposed to, uh, the alternative. But you're right. If they're in pain, I mean, think about just any other pain, right? You get
Mm-hmm.
a pain anywhere, you got a headache, you want to knock your head out, in
Mm-hmm.
the wall to get it real, right? So unless you take medicine, your head is, you got migraines, whatever. That's just a simple thing. I mean, listen, I can give you one example. About a year ago, I had a severe kidney stone, and I was in. I mean, it was just bad pain. I mean, you can don't know what you did. There's nothing you can do about it. And if anyone
Mm-hmm.
who's experienced it, you will know what I'm talking about. It is a very brutal pain. And
Mm-hmm.
there's unless you go to the ER and they give you some level of drug to just subside a little bit the pain, and that's only temporary, and then you get back to that. It's very brutal. But imagine that. So you would do whatever. I mean, I can tell you the story. I said, you know what? I
Mm-hmm.
don't care. Just do surgery, do something. Just take the damn thing. That's
Yeah.
where I got to the point. I didn't care about money, what insurance, whatever. And I was overseas, literally. I didn't even have my regular stuff. I didn't care. But that's the thing. You get to a point where there's so much pain that you just want to stop it. And you're right.
Right.
Mental health is, our brain is just another organ that needs, assistance in a lot of ways. And the mental
Mm-hmm.
aspect of it is even, more because there's the brain, which is the actual, the physical piece of it. There's a
Mm-hmm.
mental status, which is also chemicals and stuff and all these things that are happening. And you're right, the ideologies, start getting in, and it's a lot easier to just kind of. But I think the work you do is listening to people,
Mm-hmm.
and I think one of the things that you probably would recommend, if not, if I'm mistaken, is that it's okay. You know, let's talk about it. And I think that's the thing. People need sometimes to hear that. You know, they want to hear someone that's just on their side as opposed
Yeah.
to, obviously you don't agree to them to do that, but when they have a problem, you can kind of resonate with them a little bit. You can, have a little bit of empathy and understanding, and then you can deflect some of that. As you said, that's already 40%. If you can do better than that, and get them to maybe a therapist or someone that can actually,
Mm-hmm.
which is the other part. People may not want to go to that route because, as you said, people are going to look at you like, oh my God, you're saying this, you're doing this. Good
Mm-hmm.
example. I mean, I told you we have this show on a monthly basis. People would send the questions, but they would never come on the show. Only
Uh-uh.
I've had a few people that actually called in, but for the most part, we give them even access. They can literally be on the show with us. But people are it's still that stigma, like, oh my God, I'm going to ask this question. Like people are going to think that I'm, having a problem. There's nothing about it. I think we all should ask the questions because it gives you at least the answers that you need. Maybe you can tweak a few things to help you deal
Mm-hmm.
with some situation. And what we forget that, one thing I love about that show is that the doctor breaks it down to the brain chemistry and where it's all
Mm-hmm.
happening, the front lobe and all these things that are happening, mechanically speaking and anatomically speaking inside our brains, things that, it's you have no control over. These are chemistries.
That's it. That's it right there. We have no control over it. And the other thing that's so important within this conversation is thinking about the other fear that exists with people. People are afraid of that stigma for sure, but people are also terrified of what happens when they admit that they're not well. Like what happens if I call the 988 line, or if I call the Trevor Project, or I text the crisis text line? Like is a cop car going to come bash down my door? Am I going to be hauled out to a hospital? Am I going to be detained? I mean, people are terrified about what that is going to bring on after they acknowledge the fact that they're not okay. And that's a huge misconception, that there's, some chain reaction that happens and, you're going to end up being hauled away. That's not the case. People, I mean, obviously at times there are interventions that for the sake of that person's safety and well-being, we have to do when we get people involved. But 99% of the time, what someone's doing when they call us is they're just talking. They're just talking. They can say as much or as little as they want. What they share is entirely up to them, and what they're going to get in return is just the validation that we get it. You're hurting, and it makes sense why you're hurting, because these things are happening to you, or these things are the things that you're feeling. So I think the more often that we can remind people that calling that lifeline is one of the greatest gifts that you can give yourself. And B, when you call and you talk to someone, whether it's on a lifeline or you call a friend or you reach out to someone you can trust, that that shows you inevitably that you're not alone. That's what all of this talking that like you and I are doing, and you and other people are doing, and I'm doing with other people, like what we're doing is reminding people that like we're all in it together. We're all dealing with shit, whatever that shit might be. And we we are stronger when we're honoring that, and we're owning that, and we're sharing it with each other. Because if you look at, if I don't know what's going on in your head, I can't possibly help you. Look, no one knew my father was struggling. He was so good at keeping it hidden that we had no idea. And my parents had the most beautiful marriage, the most beautiful relationship. I woke up every morning as a child to the sounds of my mom and dad laughing and drinking coffee in the kitchen every morning I can ever remember. He was a happy, beautiful man. And on the inside, he was completely broken. And I often wonder, I can't help but wonder, like if he had really had someone to talk to, a lifeline like this, or a therapist to really get into it with, would it have changed the outcome? I don't know, maybe. But I just know that now we do have these resources in place, and the lines of communication are open with people. And you and I are having these conversations, and so are millions of people around the world. And we have to keep having them so that we create a safe space where it's okay to not be okay.
Thank you. That's a key one. It's okay not to be okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's all right. Just speak about it. But
Mm-hmm.
you touched on something that as much as it's not the reality, it is the perception. Meaning that people think that by calling on being registered into one of those logs, that now it's a history that you have mental health, and therefore now it will be with you for life, whatever you go. If they, a good example, again, we're in the states, Second Amendment, right? So if someone in the state of Texas wants to get a firearm license, right? They would
Mm-hmm.
have to go through, the state, database. Is this going to affect it? Now, obviously, if someone is having a mental, concern, that may be preventing him from doing something to get a firearm license. That's an extreme example. But the fact is, people are trying to potentially cover that because they don't want anything to be affected by
Mm-hmm.
by things that they might lose as a privilege because of their status of being registered as such. Now the other thing is the movies have not helped us, in this world, because every single movie that you think of, about mental health winds
Mm-hmm.
up in a room with pads and a lock,
Yeah.
and people beat you down, and the doctors don't accept your statement, and they believe that you're not in a good state, and they're not taking your word for it. So people are already subjected to that level of like understanding, although it may not be the real, but that's what we've been seeing all along. So
Mm-hmm.
therefore now all we know is that. And so I don't trust, Lisa is going to tell me, no, this is not going to happen. I don't know Lisa, right? That's a problem. So let's can you expand on that, and what assurances, if any, are there for people to actually get comfy that it's okay? This is, there's a degree. I mean, obviously, if you get, admitted to a psych, ward, whatever, for whatever
Mm-hmm.
measures. And by the way, those are extreme measures for someone who may not be treatable outside. Like, there's
Mm-hmm.
outpatient, there's inpatient, like everything else.
Right. Right.
You know, but is there a limit that we can share with people? Like, listen, if you're just at this level, you just have a conversation, this is confidential. It's not gonna, go beyond this. So at least people would feel at ease, because I think that's a problem.
Yeah. Yeah. Everything. Now, I obviously can only speak for the Trevor Project because that's the lifeline that I work with. And what I can tell you is that number one, we are all of us who are taking calls who are crisis counselors, we are in a completely isolated space. We have to, I mean, have to be. It is a mandatory requirement. We have got to be in a room alone. There is no one else there. There is no one else listening to the phone call. Calls are confidential. We are not giving out people's personal information. We're not, we're not subject to police interrogations or medical interrogations. I mean, nothing like that is happening. I mean, the only times, like as I said, that we would ever have to take steps to protect someone and have some kind of either an involuntary or a voluntary intervention is if someone's life is at imminent risk, and an attempt is being made and we've exhausted every other option of trying to de-escalate somebody's behavior. And that is the only time that we would ever have to get authorities, to you to protect you and keep you safe, because that's our only concern. Otherwise, what we talk about, number one, is the caller's agency, giving the caller who's calling us agency the entire time they're on the phone is our number one priority. We're not there to talk about ourselves. We're not there to share our own personal details. Everything about the call is about the caller and how they want that call to go, what they need, what they feel like they want to share, what they don't want to share. I mean, we do something called a risk assessment, which is it's very standard practice at Trevor Project and on all the other 988 style lifelines, where within the first 5 minutes, we're doing something called a risk assessment. And it can vary slightly from organization to organization, but the basis of it is within the first 5 minutes of the call, we need to know where you're at emotionally. We need to know, are you thinking of killing yourself? And so we ask people need to be prepared that when they call a lifeline like that, someone is going to ask them pretty quickly in the conversation, like, are you thinking of killing yourself? And that's the language that they're going to use. And that can really throw people, because that's a really tough question to be asked. But the reason why we're asking that is because we need to assess, like, we need to know, are you okay? And that's the only thing that we care about. And depending on how the caller answers that question, there's like a yes path and there's a no path. And if it's a no, we may ask you, have you ever thought about suicide before? And you might say, yeah, I did a couple months ago. I was in a bad place, and we'll talk that through a little bit, and then we continue on with our conversation. If it's a yes path, I'm going to ask you, have you done anything today to try and end your life? Do you have the means do you have a plan? Do you have those means? Where is it? Things like that. Like, so, it's kind of a chain reaction depending on how you answer it. But that's the kind of thing that people can be expecting. And it's standard practice. It's not just happening to you. It's happening to every single person. When we get a third party caller, which is somebody, like if you were calling on behalf of a friend who was struggling and your friend couldn't call and you were worried about that friend and you called the Trevor Project, you're called a third party caller because you're not the person in crisis. I'm going to do a risk assessment on you. And then you're going to help me do one on the person you're calling for. So that's how thorough we need to be. We need to make sure you could be calling me as a parent looking for just information about the LGBTQ community in your area. I'm going to do a risk assessment on you. So that's just standard practice. Beyond that, people are not, if you're just having a conversation with us, people are not going to be banging down your door. We just want to be there to listen, and everything is completely confidential.
Well, thank you. And I love the way I mean, obviously it's a system that is working and you guys are doing it. But I love that it's a direct question, because there's two things that I can see just from that question. If I'm really contemplating it, then now I'm going to start thinking about it, in a different way. Because sometimes it takes that word to really to make you realize, oh my God, this is as serious as it gets now. Because now you're not playing around the bush here. You're straightforward. You're like, are you gonna kill yourself? Huh? I mean, I haven't got that far, right? So that's why I'm in my mind. I mean, right now when you said that, that's what went in my mind. It's like, if you ask me that question, I'm gonna think about it a little bit further. So maybe I can question my judgment at this point. But you're right. It's at least a way to determine. But I love the clarification that it stops there, unless you are in imminent danger where you need to take action. At that point,
Right.
what you're doing, you're saving a life. The rest of it is irrelevant because that can happen, and there's always a way around that as well. But you got to save that. Now, that takes
Mhm.
me to the question: have you ever had someone that was in imminent danger that you guys, or you, or someone in the
Mhm.
drug project that you had to intervene and take care of and hopefully save the life?
I myself personally, now I've been on the Lifeline for over a year and a half now, and I have had many imminent risk and or high risk calls. In fact, my very first my very first day, my very first call after I had gone through, the months and months of training and all of the practice calls, and I was on the Lifeline for the very first time. The very first call I picked up was an imminent risk call. It was an in-process suicide attempt. And 3 hours later, because we're on that call from the time we answer the phone until that person is safe and has a plan and they're going to do a callback and we know that that person is secure. So I have had those calls. I have never personally had a call that required an intervention, but they happen from time to time. It's not something that happens on the regular, but it definitely does happen. It's just that particular thing has never happened to me.
So just as curious, you know, I mean, the work is awesome, right? So if someone wants to join, how does that work? I mean, because I'm sure there's someone that's like, I want to be part of this. I want to be able to
Mm.
help. I mean, is there an opening? Do you have to be in a particular area? Do you have to be have a certain degree? What's the requirements to be part of the counselor system?
So in the context of the Trevor Project, it really there is no degree requirement in terms of you don't have to have a background in healthcare or in any kind of crisis counseling. I mean, they will train you according to their very, very proven and effective system of answering crisis calls. The way that you would approach it is to visit their website, which is the trevorproject.org, and you can click on, there are prompts. You click on, become a counselor, and you would submit your information. There's a form to fill out, and you're of course, vetted. There's an incredible vetting system that happens. And then depending on whether or not they are kind of in a phase where they're looking to bring on and train more counselors. I know that, during the pandemic, everybody needed counselors and everybody was trying to be counselors. And so they actually had to put things on hold because they had such an influx of people who wanted to volunteer. And then they opened that up again. And I happened to kind of be in that cohort when it opened up again. So once they accept you into the program, then the whole thing is asynchronous. So it all happens at your own pace, relatively speaking, at your own pace. And it happens from home, but there's a lot of, connection with supervisors and other counselors and other peers and people who are also training. And it's probably about a 3 or 4 month, pretty intensive program where you're kind of passing each milestone in order to allow you to continue through the program. And then there are, you're doing training calls and sessions and all sorts of different kinds of training modules. And then eventually you have your training calls where you're kind of shadowed by a supervisor. You're facilitating the call, but you're shadowed by someone who's kind of in the system with you in case anything happens. And then eventually you progress to the end of the end of the cycle, and you're on your own.
Well, listen, it sounds like, it's a pretty solid process, and
Mm.
I do have to say, I mean, you're in the business of saving lives, really, because that's what you're doing. Hoping, you're not hoping, you're working to make sure
Mm.
that the people, and from your answer, I mean, you guys are doing a terrific job because it sounds like you take care of business, from start to finish until you get these people to a better
Yeah.
place, and therefore they're not anymore. And then there's a follow up, as you said, which means that this is not ending at that end of the call. There's more to
Mhm.
it. Now, do you also work referrals? Let's say if someone really needs help, to go to like a therapy or something, do you kind of facilitate that for them, or they have to do that on their own?
I mean, we don't facilitate it in terms of making appointments for people, things like that. What we do is from time to time, we have a really, really extensive internal database of
Resources. Okay.
resources and support. So while I'm on a call, I'm also on my desktop within kind of the Trevor Project's closed, private portal. And we've got different resources available that I can search kind of on the fly for different things. And then we've got supervisors who are, you're never alone. You're alone on the call, but there are always people on the internal network who you can say, I have someone who's looking for these resources in this area. This is their demographic, and this is what they're looking for. And then I'll have like 12 people at once, who are maybe not on calls, who are idle at that moment. They'll just start doing the digging for me, and everybody kind of collaborates and pitches in to find resources for people. So it's an incredibly collaborative environment. And so if we don't have the resource that somebody needs on hand, we have ways of sourcing it, which is great. So we're definitely there to point people in the right direction, but we always ask ahead of time if somebody is open to the idea. We're never just saying, here, listen, I'm going to give you this resource. It always has to be the caller's decision. Yes, I do want that help, or yes, I do want that resource or that suggestion. And once we've gotten the okay from that person, then we're happy to give them whatever the resources that they need. I mean, there are times that we'll help people find therapists in their area, but it really is up to them to go ahead and make those calls and find that therapist on their own.
Oh wow. I mean, well, listen, I appreciate, I mean, you've given so much clarity about this process, and for people who need the resource and for people who want to be the resource. I mean, literally you
Mhm.
have all the options. Now, again, it's only in the States, or, I guess the counselors are in the States, and you work
Yeah.
only with folks in the United States, or like you said, you get calls, I mean, out of ad
We
hoc. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the Trevor Project is designed to be used here within the United States, all of the United States. And we also do have a Trevor Project Mexico that started about a year and a half ago. So that's the only other Trevor Project organization that exists outside of the US. But again, like you said, like we do occasionally, because the world we live in now, it's so easy for somebody in Europe to pick up the phone and to call. So we're never going to turn that person away. But the service is really intended to be used by people who are here in this country. So, but if somebody does call from out of the country, we'll always do what we can to help them find a resource that might be more, appropriate for them based on where they are and what they need.
But there's no now. Quick question. I mean,
Yeah.
is there, for someone that may think that, well, I don't want to call because I don't want to pay, get billed or something, because that it always comes out of my,
Mhm.
I'm assuming the service is free to no cost to people when they call in, right?
Absolutely no cost whatsoever. You could be on the phone with someone for whatever the reason, for any length of time, as long as that call needs to happen. And there is absolutely no charge at any point. It's completely free. And we're there and available and answering calls 365 days a year, 24/7.
Wow. So it's literally there's access any given,
Mhm.
and again,
Yeah.
that's the key, folks. I mean, the idea is that there's always someone that's willing to listen, to help and
Mhm.
assist, and that's really a great thing to know. And of course, that's our mission, is to make sure that people are aware and they have the resources that they need. Now, you also, I guess, a storyteller with the National Alliance of Mental Illness. Is that, what is that about?
So, the National Alliance on Mental Illness is a grassroots organization that does a lot of the same types of things that a lot of these other mental health organizations do. They create programs and services and trainings to help people navigate different aspects of their mental health and well-being. And NAMI, it's called NAMI, and they have offices all around the country. And one of the programs that they offer is called the Storyteller Program. And it's not just for people who are survivors of suicide loss like me. It could be someone who is a caregiver, maybe for someone who is dealing with mental illness, or someone who lost someone as a result of mental illness. So it's kind of a wide array of people that they have who go out and they talk within their communities. I'm here in Boston, just north of Boston. So in Massachusetts, I go all over the state of Massachusetts and talk to different organizations. Could be schools, could be civic organizations, um, could be universities, and tell my story. And encourage other people to share their own stories and their own experiences. And it really just it creates a bridge for people to recognize that they're not the only one who might be dealing with the situation that they're dealing with. And it gives people hope that there's kind of an after, I mean, when you're in the thick of it, whatever it is that you're dealing with, it's so hard to see that you're not the only one dealing with it. It's so hard to imagine that there's a whole world of people out there who might be dealing with similar stuff. And maybe I can share some part of my story that resonates with somebody else who's at an earlier point in their grief or their loss or their journey, and maybe it helps them. So that's the whole point behind the Storyteller program, and I've been doing that with them since last year, and it's a great program. People, and that's also free as well. So any organization who may want to bring a NAMI storyteller to their community can just call the National Alliance on Mental Illness and set that up, and that's free of charge.
Well, thank you. So now we're coming to the end of the show. So I know you have a few books and you also have a website.
Mm-hmm.
So people can reach out to you through the website to get assistance or to be participating. How does that work? And what would they expect?
So my website has really become, by design, it's become kind of a hub, kind of a destination for mental health resources and support. It's not just specific to suicide and that kind of grief and loss, but it's just a generalized grief, loss, mental illness, mental wellness. One of the things that I've done a lot of work on in the past 6 months is the mental health resources page that I have built into this site. I wanted to make a list that was as comprehensive as it could possibly be. I mean, no list is perfect. No list has everything on it, but I really was striving to create a really inclusive and comprehensive list for kind of the more robust communities out there in the world, like the Asian community and the Latinx community and the BIPOC community and the LGBTQ community and the elderly community and the veteran community. And I wanted to source as many of the top resources within those communities specific to that group. So I've got 16 different subject headings, and online mental health resources, mindfulness resources. And it's really designed to be a place where people can just go and pretty quickly find exactly what they need without having to think about it. Because when you're in crisis or you're dealing with someone who's in crisis, last thing in the world you want to do is worry about, where am I going to get the resources that I need, and how can I trust these resources, and how do I get to them? So the whole design is to put things in front of people in a way that they can get exactly what they need with one click. So that's on there too. And my books are on there too. And I've got a YouTube series, the Suicide Survivor series, that's in my on my website too. So everything's there all in one place, at lisasugarman.com.
I'm looking at the site. It's pretty cool, and I see the pictures of you and your dad, and
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it's amazing. Like you would never tell. I mean, from seeing the picture
Mhm.
that someone will. It's amazing. Like you can never tell. So, folks out there, you don't. It's what it is. But when you look at someone, know that they might be going through some grief themselves, and always be on lookout to help for someone, because you never know who is suffering. And I love what you mentioned something earlier that's important, that if someone knows of someone that may have a difficulty, or they think they may be suicidal, I think
Mhm.
they can reach out themselves and try to get some intervention, to help their friends or whoever it is. So that's another level of resource that I think we should make sure that people are clear about that. If you don't your friends, whoever that you think maybe in that level of thinking, he might be not able to do it themselves because they don't want to do it, but maybe you could be that help that gets them
Mhm.
the resource and help. And I think that's another thing to just to worth mentioning and focusing on here.
No,
So
absolutely. Absolutely. And one of the things that I think is the most important thing that we can pass along to people is reminding people that the one of the best tools that you can have in your pocket, just always have it in your pocket, is that 988 crisis lifeline. Because whether you're the one struggling or you know someone who's struggling or you've got questions or issues or you're just not feeling right, that's the number to call to get yourself the help that you need or get your person the help that they need. And it's a place where you're going to get validated, it's non-judgmental, and you're going to get someone on the other end of the line who's going to be willing to sit and to listen as long as you need to talk.
Lisa, I mean, I know I mentioned something about the cost and stuff, but I believe a lot of resources out there are available for free and no cost to
Mm,
people. So, because
yeah.
that's the other thing, like, because if you're going to go to a therapist, that might cost you.
Hmm.
You may not have the insurance. Maybe insurance does not cover a certain particular provider. And again, that's my world. My background is insurance, so I'm always, that's important to me in terms of discussion. But I know there's quite a bit of resources out there that you could access without having
Hmm.
to worry about, the out of pocket costs and whatever it is. So there's always help out there, and depends on the circumstances. But usually there is someone, and you said 98 it is for everyone. It doesn't
For
matter.
everyone. Yep.
So
Yep. And again, like the Trevor Project, 988, and also the crisis text line, if someone is maybe not feeling like they want to have a voice to voice phone call with someone, they can go ahead and text the crisis text line and they can have that conversation over text if it's safer and more comfortable for them. And so all of these organizations like Trevor 988 crisis text line, NAMI also has their own lifeline number. All of these numbers are free of charge.
So, technical question. I know all call centers, technically have a TTY line. I mean, I'm assuming you
Hmm.
have the same, and so there's
Hmm.
ability
Yes.
to for people that can communicate through that. So, just again,
Mhm.
mental health doesn't just affect, it affects everybody. So you might not be able to speak it, but you can at least, communicate some way, right? So it's an
Hmm.
important, piece to know that. I mean, there's always a way to communicate with someone to assist. So because I know that that's a big thing in call centers because not everybody can pick up the phone and call. So these
Hmm.
CTY exchanges can make it. I know there's 711. I think 711 is the exchange for that. So
Yeah.
but there's different companies have their own TTY hotlines as well. So
Hmm. Yeah.
all
Yeah.
right,
We
well, yeah, go ahead, Lisa. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say that we have them too, and we actually have translators as well. So we definitely have as many of the resources as we can possibly have to enable everybody to have the conversation that they need to have.
Thank you for that because that's a big thing. I mean, we're talking about the U.S. and we do have a lot of immigrant ethnic background, so on and so forth, and languages that are spoken, and so some folks may need assistance in the language of their I guess their native tongue. And I'm not sure if you use the AT&T hotline or whatever language line, but as long as you have the access to all the core languages, I guess that's another thing. That's always good to hear that there is the right resource for everyone, so everybody can be heard and helped. And I think that's a big deal, in any type of intervention or assistance that people are providing out there. So thank you for sharing that. That's a big piece too.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, Lisa, I know we've exceeded our hour here, but it was just a great discussion and definitely a good resource as a show today. Your link is definitely going to be a resource for a lot of people, and the idea is that now they know that something else is available to call and hopefully to talk to someone to help and prevent an outcome that doesn't have to be there, right?
Yeah,
So let's hope that we can save lives. One life at a time makes a difference, right? And
that's right.
so
Yeah.
that's all we can do. And so anything you want to close our show with today, and advice you want to give to our folks out, listening today?
I honestly would just say the same thing. I feel like I say every time I get the chance, is just let yourself be vulnerable. Because if people don't know what's going on the inside, people on the outside can't do anything to help. So share what's going on, be open, be vulnerable, and let people in, because once we do that, that's how we find the hope and the help that we need.
That's it. That's powerful, and it starts with that, right? You got to open. People are not going to read you unless you share. And yeah, I mean, it's okay to be weak at that time because we are weak by default. As humans, we're not that strong. We're not that
Hmm.
rigid. We are soft no matter what you how strong you think you are, we are, and we do need the help, and we're not here alone. So I think that's the biggest message that you can give to someone. So thank you for that.
Yeah, of course.
All right, well that's it, folks. We're coming to the end of the show. Lisa, thank you so much for being with us, and I had a great time. We've shared quite a bit. Thank you for sharing your story and the work you do, and definitely bringing another resource to our audiences. So thank you so much.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure as well. Well, that's it, folks. This is a wrap for today's show. We'll be talking soon. New day, new show, new topic. Hurricane H out. Bye.